on Deputy Eoin O'Brien to begin Leaders' Questions under Standing Order 36.
Thank you, Cian. Minister, it has never been more difficult to be a renter. Rents are through the roof, and last year almost 20,000 eviction notices were issued to tenants. The single biggest cause of homelessness, as I'm sure you know, is evictions from the private rental sector. According to the Residential Tenancies Board, the average cost of a new rental is now €20,000 a year. In Dublin, 26,000. In fact, in some parts of the city, a new rental is as much as €36,000 a year. New rents increased by almost 5% in the last 12 months, existing rents by 6%, and even in rent pressure zones, rents are increasing above the 2% cap in almost all of our cities. Dublin, Cork, Galway, Limerick and Waterford. Last year, rents for existing renters rose between 4 and 5%. And indeed, since 2020, under your and your colleagues' watch, rents have increased by an astonishing 40%. And of course, your renters' tax credit has been swallowed up by rent increases for landlords. And all the while, your failure to meet your own social, affordable and private for purchase targets means that many people who do not want to be in the private rental sector are trapped there in insecure and expensive accommodation. Now, during the election campaign, Fine Gael promised to retain the rent pressure zones. Your own party's manifesto said you would review the effectiveness of RPZs. And there is no mention at all in the programme for government of ending the caps. But on Sunday, Micheál Martin suggested just that. He said that the government was considering replacing the RPZs when they expire at the end of the year. And I have to say, his comments read like the speaking notes of the industry lobbyists for institutional investors. And the more important point is they have caused real concern among renters. I've been inundated with emails and with phone calls. One woman told me, and I quote, that the rule at the current rate of 2% is the only thing between myself, my daughter and homelessness. This woman is 70. She works to pay the rent. Her daughter has special needs. She's paying a rent in my constituency of €1,477 a month. Ending the RPZs or allowing landlords to reset the rents between tenancies means she would be faced with rents currently of €2,700. Another constituent told me that he never knows when the landlord might end his tenancy, but at least with the RPZs he knows what his rent is going to be year by year. A third renter told me that ending RPZs is, and I quote, going to drive up rents and make thousands of people homeless. And one very distressed tenant wrote to the Taoiseach, and he CC'd myself and others in it, and he said, and I quote, if you honestly cared about renters, Taoiseach, you would not be considering how to benefit private investors, but how to benefit renters. Minister, I cannot stress the impact the Taoiseach's comments have had on renters. And in fact, any of those renters reading the front page of the Daily Mail today would be even more concerned, because apparently the Taoiseach has told your parliamentary party for members of Fianna Fáil to brace themselves for unpopular decisions. It seems that the partial rollback by the Taoiseach in Brussels yesterday was about as misleading as his claim that 40,000 new homes would be delivered last year. So what I'm asking you, Minister, is to provide some comfort for those renters genuinely concerned about the government's intentions, to make it clear that you're not going to break your election promises, and will you give a commitment not to take any action that results in renters having to pay even higher extortionate rents?
Thank you, Deputy Minister.
Thank you, Cian, and I thank the Deputy for your question. And I know we're all faced with many constituents across our own constituencies in Dublin and indeed across the country that are facing difficulties with rent rises, facing difficulties with accessing an affordable home. And that's why housing policy is the single biggest issue for this government, and why we want to take further action when it comes to housing. And I can assure the House that this government is absolutely committed to delivering more homes quickly for people, be it to rent or to own. And we are advancing further policy options on how we can do just that. And I want to be very clear that the Taoiseach said that he is open to the possibility of developing an alternative system to rent pressure zones, which protects renters but also enables people to have a clear, stable stable environment in which to invest. This is not about increasing rents for tenants. It's about increasing supply, which will ultimately reduce rents. And I think it's incumbent on all of us in this House to be willing to examine all policy options and look at different approaches and models, because it is clear we need to build more homes in this country and we need to increase the pace at which we build them. We fully recognise the need to protect and support renters, and that's why we advanced further progress for renters in the context of the renters tax credit in the last budget. It's also why we legislated for tenancies of unlimited duration and restricted the level of upfront payments required for tenants. As you know, rent pressure zones were introduced in 2016 and they're in place until the end of this year presently, and that's why the Department of Housing last year reviewed rent pressure zones, and the Department of Housing have also got the Housing Agency now to undertake a review which will assess the operation of RPZs, and is expected that this analysis will conclude in Q1 of this year, obviously in advance of the legislative timeframe that I've set out. And any potential future policy options or amendments that will arise from the review will be brought to government, considered carefully, and obviously coordinated by the Minister for Housing. And let me be absolutely clear to you, there is no predetermined outcome to this review. A well-functioning private rental market is a necessity and has to work for tenants and for landlords. As the Housing Commission report noted last year, the available evidence indicates that the impact of RPZs has been mixed. And 8 years on, we need to ensure that the system is fit for purpose, that it protects tenants, but that it does not deter landlords. Without landlords and investors, there isn't a private rental market. Changes to any aspect of housing policy must be looked at in the round. We need a system that increases and encourages development activity and supply, reduces costs for homeowners and renters, and provides for stability and certainty for all concerned. And that's why we have a record level of capital investment in housing. And as Minister for Public Expenditure, I'll be undertaking a review of the National Development Plan, where the role of the state will be strengthened in this government when it comes to the provision of social and affordable homes across our economy. But we also have to be honest. We know the Department of Finance analysis that to build 50,000 homes will require €20 billion of investment capital per year. And I expect the state's role in that context to grow. But we have to ensure that the investment environment, to ensure that we've more homes for people to rent, that we can strengthen the affordability for future homeowners, is part of the overall picture when it comes to housing policy. So let me be clear, we'll undertake a review of this. It's in advance of the legislative timeframe of the end of this year, and the Minister for Housing will coordinate that. And the central focus of that is to protect renters, but also to increase the number of rental properties across our country, where we know there's a really restrictive shortage of supply.
Thank you, Minister. Deputy O'Brien to respond.
Minister, I have to say you really are living in cloud cuckoo land. For the last number of weeks, there has been a really intensive lobby from Irish Institutional Property, Property Industry Ireland, the Irish Property Owners Association, all claiming, wrongly in my view, that the rent pressure zones, and inadequate protection as they are, but still some form of protection, are the reason why government didn't meet their targets last year. That's not true. The reason why you didn't meet your target of 33,000 new homes last year is because for the 5th year in a row, you missed your social and affordable housing targets. The failure to meet housing need is on the government, not on renters and the rent that they pay. And you could scrap the rent pressure zones tomorrow. You could allow landlords to reset the rent between tenancies to market rent, and not a single new home would be built. How do we know? Because that was the case a number of years ago. Institutional investors were investing in the market when rent pressure zones were first introduced. It is ECB interest rate rises that have caused that problem. But I have to say, given that renters are paying higher rents than ever before and have more insecure tenancies, the idea that this government has their back is a nonsense. So please, will you confirm you will not do anything that will increase the pressure on hard-pressed renters?
Let me be absolutely clear. We want to protect renters across our country, and we want to increase the number of rental homes that are available for people who want to rent in our country. And central to that proposition is increasing the number of homes that are built across our country. And the unfortunate reality of this is, Deputy, Your housing policy would result in a complete failure of housing supply if it was progressed. And I think the people had their say on that. Your approach is not credible. You would abolish all the supports for first-time buyers. You'd put back the work of the LDA for years, and you'd devise a new pseudo form of home ownership where you'd own the house but not the land it was built on. So let me be absolutely clear to you. It's important that a new government with a new mandate assesses housing policy so that we can increase the supply of homes that are available to rent and also the homes that are available to buy across our country. And that's how this government will take action over the coming months.
Thank you, Minister. And we now move to the Labour Party Deputy Ivana Bacik.
Cian Minister Chambers, I want to return to the biggest immediate challenge facing this government, and that is the issue of housing. And despite the bluster from government, you have admitted that you have built last year nearly 10,000 fewer homes than the outgoing government said they would. All of us here, from our constituents, from communities around the country, that housing is the single biggest issue facing families, facing individuals. We hear it from people who are homeless. We hear it from families who are living in housing insecurity. We hear it from young people who cannot move out of their childhood bedrooms because they cannot find an affordable home anywhere in their neighbourhood. Tomorrow morning, we will debate a Labour Party motion which sets out a clear pathway for the radical actions necessary to address this housing catastrophe, which sets out our proposals for an active state intervention to address this, to ramp up delivery. We offer a radical reset of housing policy, as your own Housing Commission called for. Yet we see that you and your Cabinet colleagues have now agreed a counter-motion which will reject our ambitious proposals for change and instead, it seems, will offer only more of the same, more of what hasn't worked to deliver homes for people. The only suggestion of change is from the Taoiseach to weaken protections for renters and to provide more money to developers with no active role for the state. Minister, can you explain why you're so set on repeating the mistakes of the past? Repeating the same mistakes which led to missed targets and lack of delivery under Housing for All, and indeed which created the conditions that led to the last property crash under your own party's watch. Minister, I think all of us are now clear that your party and Fine Gael misled the public on housing delivery in the general election. It is only 12 weeks since we were in the thick of that campaign, and in the pitches to the public from Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael, there were claims that construction would exceed targets, that 40,000 homes would be built. There was nothing about ending rent pressure zones, nothing about prioritising tax breaks for developers. Indeed, Fine Gael even committed to retaining rent pressure zones, and your own party's manifesto committed only to continue to review them. On the same page that you boasted about capping rents using RPZ legislation. No indication that you'd be pulling the rug from underneath renters, removing the safety net that is there. Minister, the Taoiseach has warned your TDs to brace themselves for a raft of unpopular decisions on housing, but renters that we are all hearing from every day since the Taoiseach's pronouncement on Sunday, renters are bracing themselves, facing the fear that their monthly bills will further skyrocket. In your new role, Minister, as in public expenditure, you must be concerned by the Taoiseach's threatened transfer of public money from investment in necessary state infrastructure, from beefing up the Land Development Agency, instead, it seems, to delivering off-the-cuff handouts to developers. Minister, handouts to developers did not work in the past. They made matters worse. Can you confirm that the RPZ laws will be renewed this year? And what evidence do you have that tax breaks will lead to any increase in housing supply?
Thank the Deputy for your question. And just to maybe set out the context on housing supply, it has significantly increased since 2020, with 130,000 new homes delivered in that period. And obviously everyone on the government benches and indeed across the House was disappointed with the final numbers for 2024, which were less than what we were expecting. But it's not true to say that we missed our Housing for All targets. If you look at the overall net position over a period of 3 years, we saw 29,000, 32,500 and 30,300 delivered, which was, in a combined total, exceeded the overall target over 3 years. But what we need to do is look to the future to drive significant supply of homes across our economy. And the volume of homes built in the last 5 years represents the highest delivery for many, many years. And notwithstanding the short-term fluctuation in delivery, the current delivery pipeline is is very strong. Work commenced on 60,000 new homes in 2024. That's an increase of 84% compared to 2023. And it equates to work starting on an average of 239 new homes every working day of the year. And we are determined that the uplift in supply of recent years must be sustained, with the longer-term upward trend maintained. And that's why the outgoing government set new housing targets of over 300,000 new homes over a series of years. And I want to be clear in my own role as Minister for Public Expenditure. We're conducting, and why we agreed to a review of the National Development Plan, was to accelerate infrastructure delivery in our economy, in water, in energy and transport, to unlock future supply, to intensify the level of housing delivery in our economy. And I expect when you see the capital outworking of that you'll see increased allocations for housing, an increased focus of the state's role in housing supply. But if we are to deliver 50,000 new homes per year, we're going to need more private investment to work and complement with the state's role in housing. And we all need to be honest about that. The state has a central role, but we need to ensure that we unlock future private investment to drive increased supply across our economy. And that means examining all of the policy options that are available to government to ensure that we drive housing supply, to increase affordability for young people, to give them that opportunity to buy and own their own home, and also for renters in our economy, where there's a severe shortage of supply. And as I've said in response to Deputy O'Brien, we've said we're going to conduct a review with the Housing Agency. There's no predetermined outcome to that review, but it'll be evidence-based to see how can we ensure that we protect renters, but also increase the supply of rental accommodation and the development of rental accommodation in our economy. That is a necessity to ensure that people who want to rent a home today and future renters in our economy have the opportunity. If you go on to daft.ie, go onto any of the sites, it's very difficult in terms of supply of rental accommodation, and we need more homes for supply to rent in our economy.
Well, Minister, you speak about an uplift in housing delivery. The only uplift likely this year, it seems, is an uplift in the rents that people are being forced to pay. People who already tell me and tell all of us that they can barely afford to meet their monthly rents. So I'll ask you again, can you give certainty to renters that RPZ laws will be retained, or that there will be this equivalent safety net? Because currently there is nothing coming from government except uncertainty and, it seems, tax breaks for developers. We know from the ESRI that tax breaks for developers do not increase delivery. They lead to a transfer of tax revenue from the state to developers without any significant effect on supply. That is from ESRI research. Minister, I'll ask you again, will you accept our Labour motion that sets out clear evidence-based policies to provide a radical reset in housing policy and ensure that we will see an increased level of supply of homes and increased protections for renters who so badly need them?
Thank you, Deputy Minister.
I think if you were really interested in affecting Labour Party policy, you'd have stayed longer in the government formation talks, Deputy. Because I knew from all the engagement we had, you were more interested in posturing over there than you were to play a constructive role in government. We were open to your proposals. You wanted to set up you wanted to set up a state construction company which would take years. And let me be clear, our central objective will be to increase Our central objective in any review of housing policy will be to increase supply, to unlock and address all of the levers of supply which are open to government to ensure that we can drive affordability for young people and to address the severe housing shortage that is there. We will not deliver on housing unless we have a significant uplift of supply across our economy. That means the role of the state will be strengthened. It will be strengthened when this government reviews the National Development Plan. We also need to assess how we address other levers of supply, and that's what we'll be doing, whilst protecting renters, whilst protecting the vulnerable in our society.
Your time is up. We now move to the Social Democrats. Deputy Cian O'Callaghan.
Minister, you're at it again. You've just been caught out as a government using dodgy housing data, talking about 40,000 homes completed last year. And now, just now in the Dáil, you've told us that work commenced on 60,000 homes in 2024. That's using the same dodgy data based on commencement notices filed and then housing sites lying idle, which has been happening all around the country. Now, don't take my word for that, Minister. This is what Property Industry Ireland, the lobbyists for the investment funds that you listen to so much. This is what they said at the weekend about the 60,000 commencement notices in 2024. They said they will not, in fact, manifest in completed units. That's the lobbyists for the developers that you listen to all the time saying those 60,000 homes will not, in fact, end up in completed homes. So you might listen to them if you won't listen to us. Minister, last Thursday, people started sleeping in their cars in Leixlip. Dozens of people, desperate to own their own home, queued for days for the chance to buy one of just 31 homes. These homes were not cheap. They were ranging in price from €460,000 to €525,000. But when they went on sale on Saturday morning, they were gone within minutes, and scores of people were left disappointed. Minister, what happened in Leixlip is a microcosm for the chaos in housing all across the country. Homes priced at €500,000 are not affordable for most people. Still, even when they go on sale, people must sleep in their cars for days to have any chance of buying them. People are increasingly desperate, and this government has nothing to say to reassure them. In fact, Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael spent the election campaign misleading them, repeatedly telling people that 40,000 homes would be delivered. You didn't even come close to that figure. Now people can see that they were conned. Your latest proposals to address this are tax breaks for developers and sweetheart deals for investment funds. Well, Minister, this is not the policy reset that you claim your government claims it to be. It is, in fact, Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael reverting to type. We're constantly being told there isn't alternatives to getting this type of finance, but there are other options. A report by Housing Europe, commissioned by one of your own MEPs, by the way, goes into great detail about the billions of euro in funding from European Union funding streams that could be used to build affordable housing. So why is the government ignoring this? You don't have to double down on failure. My questions, Minister, are: do you think people voted for more tax breaks for investment funds? Why weren't you upfront about these proposals during the election campaign? And as an alternative, will the government use the European Union funding streams to finance the construction of housing that is affordable?
Thank you, Deputy Minister.
Thank you, Deputy O'Callaghan, for your question. What I said to the other deputies is that any incoming government should examine all of the policy options that will achieve the central objective, where I think there's consensus in this House. How do we increase the overall supply to meet the targets that have been set over a series of years? And we are open to constructive feedback and engagement on that. And what we've said as a government is that the Minister for Housing, with others, Minister for Finance, myself as Minister for Public Expenditure and others, will try and access all options to give that significant uplift in supply, which is central to achieving affordability across our economy. And I want to acknowledge the difficulties that many aspiring homeowners face, and again, the many people and couples that were left waiting with bad news at Leixlip in the last number of days, which is reflected across the country. And it won't improve if we continue with policies that don't unlock supply. And that's why there will be a two-pronged approach from this government when it comes to delivering supply and the policy options that we take. As I've said previously, we need to look at the NDP to accelerate infrastructure delivery in our economy. How do we unlock transport-oriented housing development where we have built transport networks in cities or in urban areas? And how do we progress current projects where we could unlock further housing supply? How do we address the shortages that we have with water infrastructure in our towns and regions across our country that will help unlock further housing supply? These are the policy options that we're taking, which will involve a bigger role for the state, the bigger role for the state agencies, Irish Water, the Transport Infrastructure Ireland, the National Transport Authority, the Land Development Agency. We're absolutely central to our policy is the state's role in the provision of housing supply. But we're being honest with people. If we want to reach between 50 and 60,000 homes per year, we need to make sure Ireland is an attractive place for private investment as well. And we've seen that weaken in recent years, if we're all honest about that. And that's had an impact on the overall housing supply environment. It won't improve with you attacking private investors like you've done in your initial contribution. It won't happen if you continue the attack on private investors like you've done in recent years, or your constant opposition to lots of constructive proposals which have come from government, like the Land Development Agency. When Minister O'Brien was progressing the planning legislation, you and your party were central to slowing this down, trying to undermine it, and trying to create further barriers to the bureaucracy of planning, where we needed to see progress on that in recent years. So let me be clear, it will be a bigger role for the state, but if we're going to unlock further housing supply, we need to ensure that we unlock private investment as well.
Minister.
And that's the position
Minister.
of government.
Deputy to respond. Deputy O'Callaghan.
Minister, do you know that the countries in Europe with the largest rental sectors, the most landlords, the most investors, are also the countries in Europe with the strongest forms of rent regulation? Do you know that? Do you know, in terms of constructive proposals, about those proposals in the Housing Europe report, commissioned by one of your MEPs, about how to get billions of euro of funding into affordable housing? Do you know about those, and why aren't you taking on board those constructive proposals? Minister, I asked you about you said about the 60,000 homes commenced last year. That's not correct. 60,000 commencement notices were filed, but there was not 60,000 homes commenced last year. Many of those sites are lying idle. Will you withdraw what you said on that? Because we do not need more misinformation and misclaims from this government. Will you answer my questions, Minister? Do you think people voted for tax breaks for investment funds? Why didn't you mention those during the election? And why weren't you upfront about those proposals?
Deputy Minister to respond.
Thanks, Deputy. As I've said previously, my central point on commencement notices is that we have a strong pipeline in place for supply, with commencement notices issuing of 60,000 new homes. And feedback suggests that there's unquestionably significantly more work on site than before, aided by the government's development levy and water connection waivers. And it's not just a matter of if, but a matter of when these commencement notices will translate to real supply. But that will be some supply maybe this year and next year. But I'm talking about the next 5 years, or indeed the years after that. How do we develop a housing policy which gets us to between 50 and 60,000 homes per year? To your question on renters, I've been clear to all of the others. Any policy option we take is here to protect renters, but also to make sure that we develop more rental accommodation in our country with an increased population. And we need to have private investment there to accelerate that as well, and you're not being honest about that point. So let me be clear, we'll be strengthening the role of the state to increase housing supply and trying to complement that by having housing policies that accelerate private investment as well.
Thank you, Minister. Now, deputies, before we move and before I call on the Chief Whip, I just want everybody, as there are some new deputies, to be aware that when we move to the order of business, if there is dissent, the clock starts ticking and it removes time from what we discuss with promised legislation. Any procrastinating from members takes time from the private members or from the promised legislation, so please be aware. So I now call on the Chief Whip to please, under Standing Order 35, to dictate the order of business.
I move the order of business.
Thank you, Chief Whip. Are the proposed arrangements agreed to? Not agreed. Thank you, Deputy. Thank you, Deputy.
The leader of Fine Gael, Simon Harris, must come into the Dáil to make a statement about his party's investigation into Senator Martin Conway for inappropriate behaviour to a female staff member. Cian Corla, we have written to you to request that time be set aside for An Tánaiste to do just this. We know that there was an investigation by Fine Gael. What we don't know is what Simon Harris knew or when he knew it. We also know from media reports that a sum of 10 grand was made in payment. Now, Cian Corla, I'm sure you will agree with me, a sum of 10 grand suggests a very, very, very serious incident.
Sorry,
we're entitled
Deputy,
to know what happened, and I am requesting
Deputy, I just ask that you don't make allegations of that nature. I did write back to you. You have Deputy O'Callaghan or Deputy McLaughlin received the letter. The allegation you just made with regards to monies. With regards to monies.
I repeated what was in the media, in the public
Deputy,
domain.
in this House, we don't go by the media. You have a Excuse me, deputies, if you let me speak. Resume your seat while I speak, Deputy. Deputy, I wrote back and gave you... Excuse me. While the chair is speaking, I would like to outline, I'm not saying you can't say it, Deputy, I'm saying you can't say it now. I outlined in the correspondence to Deputy McLaughlin the process for which you can say it, which is your private member's business. And that goes for everybody in the House. That may be...
Acceptable, Councillor. That is not acceptable at all.
Whether it is or it...
I'm asking you that you would put time aside to facilitate on Taoiseach to make a statement to clear up the very serious questions that are now in the public domain. And I am more than well aware of the procedures, Count Corla, and I am very certain that I am well within the rules. I am asking that you would use...
Thank you, Deputy. Resume your seat. We move to Labour. Deputy, you know full well what you received in the letter. I do not have the authority to do that, and you bring it to the Business Committee as per motion. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Cian Corla. So we have tax breaks for developers announced this week, and this week we'll be dealing with the addition of 3 new Ministers of State to the ranks, the bloated ranks of baby ministers. I was expecting to see Bertie Ahern in the chair there today. It's a case of back to the future. Tax breaks for developers and a boom in baby ministers and ministers of state. We had 15 ministers of state in 2016. We had 20 in the last government and 23 planned for this government. Now, Minister, you're bringing legislation to the House tomorrow to provide for the increase in the number of junior ministers, which is entirely unjustifiable in anybody's mind. This is a stroke, and this is about keeping restive backbenchers on board. And by the time you're finished, we will have 50 TDs from the government ranks, being chairs of committees, cabinet ministers, ministers of state. That's more than half of the entire makeup of the government, who are dependent on the Taoiseach and the Taoiseach for their political careers over the next few years. So I will ask you this, Minister. This is a stroke. How do we know? Because you have only allowed half an hour to debate a range of amendments from the opposition to interrogate and debate this very important matter. We need more time to debate this important matter.
From the SOC Dems.
And Cian Corla, last week we saw a proposal from the government to water down the Occupied Territories Bill to the point that would remove services from it. It is imperative that we enact the Occupied Territories Bill as it is, with the legal improvements that have been made to make it secure against any test at EU level, and bring it to commencement immediately in this House.
Thank you, Deputy. Deputy Michael Collins. Or, sorry, I didn't see Deputy Boyd Barrett. Yeah, Deputy Boyd Barrett, then Deputy Collins.
The government is planning to further expand the gravy train of ministerial jobs and allowances, and they are doing it with a guillotine in order to suppress proper debate and discussion of the expanded gravy train they're planning. That is completely unacceptable. There shouldn't be a guillotine. Also, we've had very alarming pronouncements made by the Taoiseach that he is planning to effectively hand over the housing sector, lock, stock and barrel, to profit-driven investors, private investors, vulture funds and corporate landlords, the very people who are responsible for the housing crisis that we have. And still, we haven't had a discussion on a Housing Commission report that we've been asking for a debate for since it was published about 7 or 8 months ago. So we are looking for, as was requested at the Business Committee, a discussion on the housing crisis, on the announcements the government are making, and an opportunity to question the new minister about these crazy housing proposals from the government.
Thank you,
Cian Corla. We would like a discussion in Independent Ireland in relation to the new speed limits that are causing serious concerns in parts of all over the country. They went down from 80 to 60 kilometres on the local routes, which most people accepted. But now we're being told that the regional routes, which is the main routes into a lot of our constituencies, are going from 100 to 80 or from 80 to 60. And if that is to continue, it will cause widespread damage to our economy, and it cannot be allowed to go ahead. And there has to be discussion. Yes, there is black spots, we fully accept that, but what we ask is time here, and at least let the public representatives, let they be council or TDs or senators, have some say and what's going to happen in their
Thank you,
constituencies.
Deputy
Thank you.
Minister, to respond, please. Sorry, the Chief Whip, or the Minister, yeah.
Thank all the deputies for their contributions. To Deputy O'Reilly's point, I said it's an internal matter for the Fine Gael party, and it's not appropriate for me. It's not appropriate for me to make any further comment on it. Deputy Nash, as you know, we've set aside not 30 minutes. We've 88 minutes to discuss this at second stage, and then 30 minutes and it's very clear what as you've set out, what the legislation is set out to do. So we obviously have ministers of state in the areas of marine and other areas and older people, and migration as well, that are going to be appointed and want to get down to work. And that's the context in which we're bringing this through and trying to accelerate the timeline around it. Deputy, give me the Tánaiste to respond back, I think, to your party last Thursday on the ongoing drafting that the government is undertaking relating to the occupied territories bringing forward a bill of our own relating to that matter. Deputy Boyd Barrett raised the issue of the, I've answered that point to Deputy Nash on the timing provided for the bill, and I've no objection to a wider debate on housing policy, and I'm sure that can be facilitated over the next number of weeks. I know there is a motion being brought forward by the Labour Party on housing, so there is an opportunity to discuss housing in the House this week, and indeed it was raised at and the Minister will be here to respond back to the motion whenever the motion is being taken. Deputy Collins, on your point on speed limits, I think the reforms that have been introduced around speed limits in this country will make a serious difference on saving lives on our roads. We know that speed is the central factor to so many of the road deaths across our country. That's why when I was in the role as Minister of State for Transport, we took on board the recommendations to reduce speed limits, particularly on local rural roads, from 80 kilometres per hour to 60 kilometres per hour, because it will make a difference and it has an evidence base. There is a role for the local authorities as well to amend speed limits where appropriate, and the outworking of that has to take place, and it will be coordinated by local authorities this year.
Thank you, Minister. Are the proposed arrangements agreed to? Not agreed. So I'm putting the question that the question is that the proposed arrangements for the week's business are hereby agreed to. Deputies in favour say tá. Deputies against say níl. In my opinion, the question is carried. Vote all.
So that's, you know what happens,